What's up guys, Ernest Langdon from Langdon Tactical here, and today I'm going to take you through the process of installing a trigger job in a bag in your Springfield XD-E. Alright, before we get started, there's a couple of things that you're going to need. First of all, a good solid bench, probably a bench block, a hammer, a roll pin punch preferably, or a punch about the size of the roll pins on the frame of your gun, and a small pick or dental pick, something that's going to help you take one of the springs out of the gun. So once you have those components, you'll be ready to start the install process. The first thing you want to do is follow the manufacturer's instructions, look at your owner's manual about how to properly clear and then field strip the gun. We just need the frame of the gun in order to install these parts. So get to that point, then we'll get started. The first thing we need to do is remove a small spring clip that holds the safety lever in place. You're going to take that little pick that I was talking about, you're going to reach down into the left side of the frame and remove that spring. Now once that spring is out of the gun, we want to maintain control of that lever, because if we release it, there's a small ball bearing under spring tension there. So be careful when you release it. You're probably going to have to wiggle the lever a little bit, and then that ball bearing will be loose and free. So make sure that you're careful you don't lose that ball bearing. Once you go ahead and remove that safety lever, it comes out with the pin. Then you can take the two roll pins out of the gun that hold the hammer housing into the frame. The first one I normally do is the bottom one. So take your roll pin punch or your flat punch, knock that roll pin out. And then for the top roll pin, you want to make sure that your right side safety lever is out of the way of that roll pin before you start beating it out. It wants to stay in line, so the best thing to do is just rotate it 90 degrees down, and then it'll be out of the way so that you can knock that roll pin. Once you've knocked that pin out, just simply lift the entire housing up out of the frame. Be cautious because there's a small decocking lever internal that is loose. Once you remove it, set that to the side. The next thing we'll do is we'll completely disassemble the hammer housing. First thing we need to do is compress, use a punch or something and compress the spring or the hammer spring that's up inside the hammer. Move the hammer spring guide support pin. So push that lever down, pull that lever out to the side, carefully release that pressure. Make sure that spring is pointed, or that plunger is pointed in a safe direction, because it is under quite a bit of spring tension. And then we'll just simply push out the hammer pin. It's actually just a sleeve, if you will, that holds that in place. And then the hammer comes out by pushing the hammer down out the bottom of the hammer housing, not up. The tendency is you want to pull it up. It actually removes by pushing it down so that we don't have to mess with the sears. Set all that aside. Now we'll continue to disassemble the frame. We're going to use that flat punch that we have to knock the two pins out. It doesn't take a lot of pressure to knock these pins out, but it's a good time for your bench block. Tap that rear pin out, which is the trigger pin, and then the front pin is the housing pin. They come out fairly easy. And then the entire housing comes up out of the frame, and at that point you can remove your trigger bar. Now when you get to this point, go ahead and look at the components that are in your trigger job in a bag package, and then remove those components from your factory parts. So take the hammer spring guide, the hammer spring guide support pin, your hammer spring, and your trigger bar, and set all those aside so that you don't get them confused with your new parts that are in their trigger job in a bag. All right, for the reassembly process, the ideal thing is to start at the front of the gun, work our way back. So we're going to take our trigger bar, apply a little bit of lubrication to that, and then reassemble the front of the gun. Basically, you're going to take the trigger bar where you put some lubrication on it. There is a pin that comes out of the side of the trigger. Make sure that is connected, and then controlling all of your parts and making sure that your slide stop is in the correct location. You should be able to drop that entire package down into the frame of the gun. It is not difficult, and it's kind of hard to do it incorrectly. All right, so I recommend that you use a punch or something to act as a slave pin to align your trigger group or your trigger housing and your trigger, line it up so that you can put your trigger pin back in place. When we put that pin back in place, we want to ensure that the groove that's in that pin is to the right, because that'll coincide with the spring that holds that pin in place. You're going to probably have to go through and use that punch to wiggle that around and make sure things line up. And at this point, you should have trigger return spring pressure. Then we can go ahead and install that front roll pin or that front pin, solid pin for the trigger housing or the front housing in the frame. This one does not matter which way you put it in. It has that groove on both sides. So just tap it in place and that is, you're all set. Then what we want to do is kind of pull our trigger and make sure that it is engaged onto the trigger bar spring and pushing up, and that our safety lever, our right safety lever, is in the right location, pointing back forward, because then it'll be lined up for your hammer housing to go in place. Go ahead and take our hammer housing now. We're going to take our new spurless or low profile hammer. We're going to again push it in from the bottom, through the bottom to the top. Once it's in place, we'll take our hammer pin, put it in place. If you do in fact accidentally cock the hammer and get it to the rear, you can take a punch, push down on that left sear. It's a split sear, there's two of them. Push down on the left sear and that'll release the hammer to get it back into that forward position for you. Now again, once using lubrication, we like again to use TW25B. We're going to take and lubricate the hammer spring and the hammer spring guide. You want the flat or closed end of that hammer spring to be down on the hammer spring guide, and the open end, and you'll be able to tell what I'm talking about, is actually up towards the hammer. Put that into the up into the hammer, and then your hammer spring guide support pin goes in from the left to the right. So ideally you want to get it started just a little bit. Take your flat punch, push that down into place, and then push the hammer spring guide support pin through. Basically reverse assembly. Once you get to this point, you're almost ready to finish the assembly of the gun. So let's get a couple of things in place. First, make sure that the spring is still in the frame, and then you're going to take that small ball bearing and put it into place. That's what allows you to have detents on your safety lever. Then take the decocking lever and lay it onto the side of the frame. You'll be able to see where the cammed portion of it, the hex portion of it, lines up with the hole in the hammer pin, and then drop that entire housing down into the frame of the gun. Then go ahead and take your safety lever that's got the pin on it. You're going to line it up and push it down through, and what you're going to have to do is let gravity be your friend. So keeping that ball bearing in place, you're going to push down on it, and you're going to rotate the right side safety lever at the same time up and down until everything lines up. This is going to allow that hexed portion on the safety lever pin to line up with the decocking lever, as well as the opposite side of the pin to go into the slot on the right side safety lever. Okay, so make sure we do that, hold all of that stuff in place, and then take that spring clip again, slide it down into the right side of the frame, and then use a punch or something to push it in, and it'll click in place. Then your safety lever is back to working. You can do a quick check to make sure that it decocks and actually disengages the safety and everything now. The gun is basically assembled except for two things. We've got those two final roll pins. There's two different size roll pins. The short roll pin goes on the bottom, and that's the one that I typically put in first using a Delrin or a plastic hammer. And then the top roll pin goes into the top hole. So get those started. And you use your punch or your roll pin punch, and you want to tap those in to they're just below the surface of the frame. Now we're ready to reassemble the gun. Let's reassemble it. Make sure we've got an empty gun. Put your levers in place, and we'll go through a quick function check. Make sure that the safety works. Make sure that the gun decocks. Cycle the gun. Try the single action. Hold the trigger the rear cycle. Make sure that the disconnector works, and then try a couple of double action shots. And what you're going to find is you'll end up with a trigger pull that's about 2 pounds lighter in double action and probably a pound or so lighter in single action. You should have about an 8-pound double action trigger pull and about a 4 to 4.5 pound single action pull, which is a great, very shootable trigger for a little compact gun like this. Guys, go out there, give this one a try. Train hard, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.